What does justice look like? Justice looks like a scar over an old man's eye. Representative Elijah Cummings, who served the United States House of Representatives for 23 years, suffered that scar as a young boy. When Representative Cummings was 11 years old, he and his buddies, all of them black, dared swim in a public pool in his hometown of Baltimore. For daring to believe they had the same right to recreation as their white peers, they were taunted and threatened by a mob of almost 1,000 people who were held back by a line of police officers and dogs. The mob never laid hands on the swimming boys, but a glass bottle hurled over a barricade did. That bottle caught Representative Cummings right above the eye, leaving a lasting impression. Cummings died on Wednesday, heralded as a champion of civil rights, fact-based decision-making, and deep community engagement. When we see Representative Cummings, we see justice, and what does it look like? Like a scar over an old man's eye. The parable of the relentless widow and the misanthropic judge can't be further away from that Baltimore swimming pool, but it asks the same question. What does justice look like? At first read, we are tempted to pity the widow, wronged in some way that Jesus never specifies. We imagine her a desperate, helpless, feeble little old woman dogging the judge for justice. What sort of hard-hearted man was that judge, unmoved by her pleas, stony to her sorrow? Truth is, though he wasn't exactly an Eagle Scout, he speaks of himself as having no fear of God and no respect for people. He may, in fact, have had some fear for his life. This widow did more than just follow him around, serenely begging for mercy. She stood outside his house in the middle of the night and threw rocks at his window. She called his landline 12 times a day, leaving menacing messages. She watched him in the courthouse, never letting him out of her sight. If the judge is to be believed, and we have no reason to doubt, the widow was aggressive. She was a stalker. My rough translation of the Greek text indicates that the judge was afraid of more than mere public harassment. He was convinced she was dangerous. When he speaks to his fellow judges and explains his plight to them, he says that he is worried she will punch him in the eye, that she will get in his face, that she will leave him marred, scarred, as was Representative Cummings. She was no wilting, weeping widow. She was the Muhammad Ali of widows, pugnacious, relentless, shameless. So when the judge finally gave in, can you really blame him granting her request? His action is described by Jesus as just. Really? Just? Justice assumes a fair hearing. Justice assumes an answer tailored to a particular question. Justice assumes that we get what we rightfully deserve, whether we are judged innocent or guilty. There is no justice here. The woman got what she wanted because she was relentless. The judge granted her wish simply to get her off his doorstep. Some would call that sort of justice the Chicago way. There is no easy way through this story. There is not one sympathetic character. Both the widow and the judge are horrible people. And yet Jesus, who himself sometimes could be scary, applauds the judge. Jesus goes so far as to use the judge as a model for God. Look at that unjust judge, he says, and how much more will God listen to you when you cry? Apparently, Jesus is willing to edit the adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. In a biblical fashion, the scary widow gets her way. Remember this, scary widows in the room. What does justice look like? Apparently, it looks like caving to pressure. We are delighted today to welcome Megan and Laura to the Lord's Supper for the first time. You know Laura and Megan by the tops of their heads because their faces are always in a book. They are brilliant, attentive, intuitive, eager to learn. They breathe in words the way most of us breathe in air. And they've been reading about this day, inhaling every resource about baptism and communion I could give them. They know what they're getting into better than most. Some of us in this room are old enough to remember a time when Megan and Laura would have been denied access to the table simply because of their age. Regardless of the fact that they are brilliant, regardless of the fact that they are deeply curious, regardless of the fact that they have been faithful since their mother brought them into the world, they would have been considered too young to receive the bread, to drink the wine, undeserving, because they had not blown out enough birthday candles. After all, those of us who are old school say, it requires a mature faith, a firm grasp of Lutheran theology, a commitment to a faultless life to be worthy of this meal, doesn't it? Thank goodness, no. Though I am a big fan of a mature faith and a firm grasp and a flawless life, it is what I aspire to every day. It is not the standard for receiving the body and blood in your hands. If each of us had to pass those tests, prove ourselves intellectually capable, worthy of the meal, we would be able to serve this deserving congregation with a couple of croutons and a shot glass. Very few of us would pass that test. Like the relentless widow who didn't deserve the kindness she received, Megan and Laura are welcome at this table because they don't deserve. None of us does. Without having to prove our case, without having to stand before judge and jury, without having to promise to live a pure and blameless life, all the love of God is laid in their outstretched hands. Forgiveness before they ask, strength greater than their own, healing of body and spirit. Though they were not quite as relentless in pestering their mother for this day as was the widow with the judge, they didn't have to be. This meal is given to all who ask. So what does justice look like? Second-grade girls standing shoulder to shoulder with scary widows, begging for and receiving mercy. A few years ago, our congregation committed itself to a prophetic task to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God. That goal has forced us to ask again and again and again, what does justice look like? Well, we have learned that it looks like a lot of things. For us, it looks like joining hands from the suburbs into the city with those who advocate and care for the homeless poor. For us, it is the discovery that we all long for the same things, all of God's children, whether we are homeless or home owner, rich or poor, regardless of the color of our skin, the name we use for God, or who and how we love. For us, it means understanding justice to be a gift not one of us deserves. When we call God, God hears us. That may not be our sense of justice, of fairness, but then who ever said that God was fair? That widow with a bullhorn, stalking that thin-skinned judge, neither of them received justice as we define it, but they received God's justice. Her trouble was heard. His hard edges were softened. She is a model of persistence. He, a model of perhaps forced compassion. So what does justice look like? Like courage etched on the face of a Baltimore boy. Like mercy granted an irritating widow. Like love placed in little girls' hands. It looks like kindness extended to those who have no home. It looks like forgiveness for all who sin. And it looks like hope. Hope that finally God's justice will prevail.